What's good, YouTube? Steel here, and sorry for the short hiatus. I didn't post the meta report the week prior, and my upload has been pretty spotty. However, it's because life was lifing, but now everything's getting back into order more or less, and you should be seeing more uploads more consistently, if not completely back to normal. Regardless, if you clicked on this video, it's not to hear about me, so enough about that. Let's get right into the meta breakdown that consists of one of the most dominant statistical performances we've seen, I think possibly ever, in Pokemon Pocket, as Giratina Darkrai just won its third straight Ursi Day Weekly. As always, if you enjoy all things Pokemon Pocket, please consider liking and subscribing, as we post everything from meta breakdowns to expert solo battle guides and so much more. And remember, stay pro. As always, the graphic to my right represents the total percentage of players that are repping each specific deck, while the stats below show the week-to-week change in that given percentage. For example, we have Giratina that went from 20% to 33.8, so just about a fifth to over a third. So that's kind of crazy when you think about it, and you don't need my help in telling you or seeing that Giratina is taking a massive amount of the whole meta, as it established itself not only as the best deck, but clearly a competitive favorite, as decks like Arceus Dialga, Executor, Celebi, despite being at the top of their respective metas, you could even put Darkrai Magnezone kind of combated with the Executor. But regardless, in their respective metas, they clearly were the top deck. However, they saw nowhere near the amount of representation that we're seeing with Darkrai Giratina. Cannot say I'm surprised, as this also reflects the state of the ranked ladder. Regardless of what rank you're in, whether you're just starting at Pokeball or you're in Master Ball, it feels at least every other game, if not multiple games, stretches of 3 games in a row, 4 games in a row, is all against Giratina Darkrai. Sometimes you'll see some variation, some people are on the Arceus build, some people are playing Druddigon, but for the most part, whether it's just the standard 4 Pokemon, nothing else, you see it all over ladder and constantly. As the format has truly turned into it's diluted itself to this sort of if you can't beat them, join them. And most people that are either complaining, they're either complaining about Giratina Darkrai or switching themselves to playing Giratina Darkrai. I'm even guilty of playing some Giratina Darkrai in ranked, but nonetheless, that's as far as Giratina goes. As for the rest of the top 5 in play rate this week, it reflects very similar to past weeks. At least definitely the week before, the one that I didn't make a meta report for, I did keep an eye on the meta itself, and it remained unchanged what the type 5 were. I do believe Magnezone finally trumped over. Oh, actually, you can see it down there. Mewtwo was at a 10%. It dropped down to 3.5, which is crazy. But Magnezone did more or less stay around the same, making it the third most played deck in this tournament. Moving forward, I believe as the season starts reaching its final moments, as we're coming down to the final week of ranked now, right? This will be the last week of ranked, and a few days after that, we should be seeing a new set. So as the season starts coming to a close, I believe that Gyarados and Meowscarada Magnezone, specifically that version of Meowscarada, have basically established themselves as the second and third best deck, which in this case, I don't know what that really means, as technically this is one of those cases where it feels second place is the first loser, as Giratina and Darkrai are so far above them in terms of success. I'm talking statistically, right? I'm not saying that these decks can't beat Darkrai. The reason that Magnezone is being played with the Meowscarada is a great counter to Darkrai strategies. Gyarados is one of those that if it gets going, it could beat anything in the format. So these decks are good, right? But I'm talking about when it comes to success and percentages and what the numbers are saying, Giratina is so far above the rest that it's hard to claim that this is the top 3 when second and third are so far down below. But don't think of that as me saying these decks are terrible, as personally I'm using my go-to deck currently in ranked, and I might make a separate video about it, is the Arceus Carnivine list, and my second one is Gyarados. And then eventually if I start going in a little loose streak, I'll consider playing Darkrai. But that's where I'm at currently. And when it comes to other less noticeable decks, at least in terms of play rate, we see decks like Gallade and Skarmory kind of hold their ground, as well as like I mentioned, the Arceus Carnivine saw a slight increase. They're holding their ground is very minimal, as it's only 15 people that are playing it. The fact that another 15 people came back this week and played it, I believe is worth noting, because it shows at least belief in the deck, or is that not completely dead, unlike decks like Arceus Dialga, which is nowhere to be seen. Yeah, I know there's 2 or 3 people, but not only is there only 2 or 3 people, they're not actually seeing success, which is when I kind of don't notice a deck because it's basically dead. But enough about the wishful thinking and the decks that could be. Let's just jump right into top 64, where Giratina Darkrai completely popped off. Top 64 has to be one of the craziest performances I've ever seen from just one deck, as Giratina Darkrai took up 65% of the top cut, which in simpler terms, that means out of the 64 people that made up this top cut, 41 of them were on Giratina Darkrai. That's just absurd. And honestly, on paper and visually, it just seems terrible for the format. As expected, Giratina Darkrai ended up taking the entire event, as even though like there was a Gyarados that got second place that had a hell of a run, it was not enough to trump such a massive amount of Giratina Darkrai's, even though they were like basically canceling each other out at some point. But it's like the less expected decks that really keep me going, because yeah, we knew Darkrai clearly was going to be dominant, but and we had Gyarados, like we had the top 5, we saw it in the metagame and we saw it in Top Cut. But when you have decks like Blastoise go undefeated in Swiss and make it all the way to top 8, that's like the part of the game that I'm truly a fan of. Let's now take a look at some deck lists, not only like the winner and the runner-up. I also want to look at the unsung heroes, including that Blastoise deck, which is that hidden diversity is like under the nightmare that is like Darkrai Giratina. That despite the horrendous like number like of how many people are just on Giratina Darkrai and how many people see success with it, and although that as a format doesn't bode too well, it's like these other decks that kind of see success through like all the rubble that truly keep me being a fan of this game and why I play it so much. Like even going up the Master Ball rank ladder, I'm using like Arceus, I'm using Gyarados, like I'm using all like as much. I'm trying to avoid using Giratina as much as possible, but I'm also finding fun in like finding these decks that either beat Giratina, but then you have a deck that beats Giratina and Gyarados, and you're trying to find like what works the best. And again, I might make a separate video on that. If you guys are interested, feel free to comment down below, and I'll try to find the time to do so. But regardless, like I said, let's get into these deck lists, starting with the winner with Giratina Darkrai. Looking at this list, it's safe to say that despite like maybe a few changes in the supporter lineup from deck to deck, it has become the norm to use the 4 Pokemon version, the 2 Giratinas, 2 Darkrai's, as it's won like the past 3 tournaments. And if I'm not mistaken, this list card for card is the same one that won the week prior. And despite there not being much input from my side or anybody to put into something that's so like solved or known or expected, we could look at its matchups across the board. And if you look down below at the stats, it's how the deck performed throughout the entire tournament. Not only the winners list, as they did not play over 1,000 games, but all 230 players combined, like what their performance was. And it gives us a better look into like how the deck is actually performing in the bigger picture. And as a whole, regardless of the matchup, this deck had a 53% win rate across the board. And to no one's surprise, it's the highest win rate among decks with at least 1% of players. In other words, like I looked at the metagame of the tournament, and anybody that had at least 7 players like using it, I compared the win rates, and 53% was actually the highest. So if you're in ranked and you see that your win rate is hovering around 52, 53, you're actually doing pretty good in terms of like, I guess like efficiency, as most decks, even the best deck in the format, is not doing too much more than that, like not winning much more than that, at least on average. And one thing that caught my eye when looking at these stats is the fact that Darkrai Giratina actually managed to win almost 60% of their games against Meowscarada Magnezone, which is technically supposed to be a counter to the Darkrai Giratina list. So I'm actually like interested as we go further into the video, once we look at that list specifically, like what the deal is basically, because it doesn't bode well if what you're trying to counter is completely bothering you. But in terms of like Giratina Darkrai, if you're trying to like have the best chance against them, if we go by the numbers, your best bet is either Gyarados, that's like basically winning half of its games against Giratina Darkrai, which I think is pretty much known at this point, where the Gyarados is more of a sense of like, do you get set up? Like if Gyarados gets to its point, it usually wins. Granted, there's a lot of things that Giratina Darkrai could do if they see the correct cards. As well as then there's Charizard, which actually managed to win 60% of the games against Darkrai Giratina in like a sample size of like, I think it's like 45 games. What this format basically says is either you play Giratina Darkrai, or you play a strategy that does not care what your opponent is doing and hope that you draw your pieces. But enough about the best deck, we all know what it does. Let's look into the second place deck, Gyarados. Now let's take a look at the second place list, as it's become basically the standard for Gyarados in terms of like the Pokemon lineup of maxing out your Gyarados, maxing out Manaphy, but only playing one Palkia. As Palkia is almost like a second one would be a liability, not only in consistency as you're trying to find Magikarp Gyarados as fast as possible. Your ideal line of play is definitely Manaphy into Palkia into Gyarados. And that second Palkia would just be like either a dead card in hand because you don't want to put it down, or if you put it down, it's a liability in terms of something that could dodge over the Gyarados by like subrining out the third point in form of Palkia. As far as the supporter lineup goes, I personally play 2 Misties and 1 Irida, but I could see the ratios as there's been many times where I wish I had that extra healing. And one thing I'm fully on board with is the addition of Mars, not only in Gyarados strategies, but like almost every strategy. As despite me not being like the biggest fan of red card, I do believe Mars in this format specifically is just so good and so strong due to like not only the flexibility of like maybe like messing up their hand early on if they're holding way too many cards, or late game basically guaranteeing that they don't have like that Cyrus or that Leaf or that extra little card that they need or that they were holding all game, or at least upping the chances that they don't see it once you flip it into, like, once you turn their like 3-card hand into one, especially in the late game. As far as its performance across the meta, Gyarados managed a 48%, 49% win rate, basically 50-50, which is impressive when taking into consideration how bad it does against decks that could just eliminate the Magikarp early, whether it's Magnezone decks with the Magnemite shooting it once it's stranded, or decks like Arceus Carnivine, Skarmory, anything that could eliminate the Magikarp. Gyarados has terrible numbers against, but it's so good against decks that let you build up or like set up your Gyarados that it manages a 50% win rate. Because when you look at 30% against Magnezone, 40% against Skarmory, if you look lower and lower, like, it's terrible against Gallade, terrible against Arceus Carnivine. So seeing it manage a 50% overall really shows the strength of the deck when it's not getting bullied. Like, I wanted to follow up Darkrai, Giratina, and Gyarados with the third best deck in terms of representation. Although its best performer only being top 16 for two reasons. Number one, I wasn't able to make a video last week, which is when the deck popped off and made its mark in the meta. And two, I wanted to take a closer look after seeing how well Giratina did against this deck to see how it fared against the rest of the matchup. And as you can see, it did struggle against Darkrai, Giratina, and it struggled against the aggression of Skarmory. But otherwise than that, it completely crushed decks like Gyarados, it completely crushed Charizard, and many other decks. As you can see, it managed to have a win rate of 47%, despite how poorly it did against not only the best deck, but other popular decks just like Skarmory. I believe it's due to all the threats being one prizers that is giving you the edge against both Gyarados and Charizard, and it's decks that tend to just build up and just one-shot everything all the way through. And the fact that you have that extra body that Gyarados is usually like, you know, they usually want to take out an EX and then other Pokemon. The fact that you're making them work for that third extra swing is what really puts you over the edge, as you're able to chip damage your way to that final swing. And when it comes to like the deck list, it's very hard to like be picky and say like, oh, this is cookie cutter or this is the exact same list that did well. When you have two stage 2 lines in your deck, that takes up more than half of the cards you have available. Then you think Pokemon Research and Professor's Research and Pokeball have to be there, and very slowly but surely you start running out of actual slots to be creative. But yeah, this deck continues to be pretty efficient. I'm surprised at how poorly it did against Giratina Darkrai. I don't know if that'll continue. Maybe if like in next week we'll see if it continues, or maybe sees less play or sees more success. Honestly, it's another thing that Darkrai Giratina has like adapted to, and I didn't really mention, was the fact that they're now playing like Rocky Helmet like maxed out. Like they did cut out Druddigon, which helps against the grass stuff, but that Rocky Helmet makes it where, like, despite these decks applying pressure, applying pressure puts you in a range where you get knocked out by the follow-up. So I'm really curious to see how the deck evolves from here, knowing that you are limited in space, but something has to change or you're not going to be able to top Darkrai Giratina with this. Another deck that I wanted to take a closer look at, due to the fact that I missed recapping it in the week prior, is the return of Skarmory Magnezone. It had like two lists do very well last week. This week, however, the best performance was top 32, which is still respectable. However, I only wanted to bring this deck up specifically to say that I couldn't in good faith recommend it, because sure, if you dodge the best deck in the format, which we saw already that's doing numbers of like a third, and then in Top Cut it was doing 2/3 of the entire like population of players. But yeah, if you dodge that deck, you can find yourself crushing countless matchups before they even get going, in terms of like hanging Gyaradoses. Maybe you pull out a Charmander, or even knock out Moltres before they even start building up. Clearly, with the help of, although this list isn't playing Giovanni itself, you could definitely speed through and knock out like the early stages of either the Meowscarada or the Magnezone line. Like, there's the reasons why the stats say that you're doing so well. Like, to the fact where despite it being under 30% against Giratina Darkrai, it still managed a 50% win rate as a whole. And it's 100 games is not like a small sample size either. Like, maybe it's not enough to like establish like, oh, this is what it is. But the fact that in 50 games, not in 100 games, you manage 50% win rate is pretty impressive when the best deck in the format, it just completely crushes you, right? But when looking at all these lists that we looked so far, besides the Gyarados, if there's anything that's clear about this format, besides how good Giratina Darkrai is how good cards like Magnezone and Giratina that like provide energy. Actually, you could even add Manaphy to that. And so like basically this format just proves how broken self energy or like ramping is. And the next deck in the top 16 basically threw it all together into one. This list features a small engine of Darkrai Giratina with Druddigon alongside a full Magnezone engine. As far as its stats across the meta goes, the sample size is like way too small to make any like concrete conclusions, but this deck is definitely an interesting spin on a concept that I don't feel like too many people are like expecting or exercising, or even I don't know, like even trying out, I guess. As for how effective it may be, it is hard to say as my predictions usually come off a deck with like enough, like, I guess, substance or enough like information where I could make at least a well-informed opinion. But due to its twist and like how well it did in terms of like getting top 16 and crushing the meta, I felt obliged to like include it. Granted, I wasn't there to see all the games clearly, or any of the games, so it might be entirely possible that they were just having great luck in seeing their very small Darkrai Giratina package and essentially just playing that round after round. But regardless, I felt like the need to bring it up as it was an interesting concept and an idea. And when I saw like the limitless TCG said like Giratina Giratina Magnezone, I was like, what is this? Then looking more deeper into it, they basically got like the best of Magnezone, the best of Giratina Darkrai, just put it together and see how it did. And as you can see down below, it crushed the Meowscarada matchup. It won a fair amount against basically, well, long story short, it got top 16. It could have gone further probably if luck went its way. It's still an interesting deck, so I had to go with it. But regardless, let's go to the moment that y'all been waiting for since the beginning, and let's look into that Blastoise deck. Now it's the moment that y'all been waiting for, as this Blastoise deck not only finished top 8 when it was all said and done, but it managed to go 8-0 undefeated during Swiss. Nothing could take it down all tournament until that final moment in top 8. And similar to the Giratina Magnezone list that we just looked at, the lack of representation makes it like very hard to like really gauge how good or how lucky this performance was. But when making a meta report of like what did well, there was no way I was gonna make the video without pulling this out. And also, if y'all are interested in seeing like this deck be put to the test, I'm willing to record some gameplay in Master Ball rank. So if that's something you'd be interested in, feel free to let me know in the comments down below, as I feel like I'm not in the right position to give input on how good or how viable this list is, with first of all how low of a sample size is, so I can't even like pretend to know how it will do in the grand scheme of like 100 games, 200 games. And also, if I don't put my own input, like play it personally, I don't feel comfortable saying it. But again, when Blastoise tops, Blastoise gets represented in a meta report. So honestly, I'm kind of hyped to see a deck like this do well. Although on paper, it's essentially just a Gyarados list that decided to go, instead of like that, opt to, I guess, risk a little bit of consistency, as a stage 2 is harder to find than stage 1. But you're also safer in the form that nothing can really snipe a Squirtle. Squirtle being 60 HP means that it survives Hitmonlees, it survives Skarmory hits without Geo, of course, Carnivines, etc, etc, etc. And maybe that's like the payoff. Also, once Blastoise is built up, you are swinging for 160, which hits everything for lethal outside of, I guess, a Giratina with Cape and Charizard, or I guess a fellow Gyarados. But if Gyarados doesn't have Cape, or if any of those don't have Cape, the red definitely gets you there. As actually no, even with, okay, so yeah, Gyarados without Cape, you can knock it out with red. And if the Giratina or Charizard have Cape, you're able to beat them with red. So this deck has like multiple ways of knocking out knocking out some of the bigger hitters in the format. So I can see how it did well. It's just I'd rather give it like a chance personally, play it myself, before I give like, oh, this is the correct way to play it, or I would change this and that. Honestly, you're gonna do just like me. See this list, try it out for yourself. Feel free to comment down below if you have tried it for yourself and how it went for you, as I'm very interested in not only if this is sustainable, but if it's like a real deck in the format now, or if it was just like one lucky guy. Ultimately, as we enter the final week of the ranked season, I truly believe that these Earthsea Day weekly tournaments serve as a great way to gauge not only where the meta is as a whole, but what to expect on like the ranked ladder, regardless of your rank. In other words, brace yourselves for a lot of Darkrai Giratina, as we come down to the wire. It's gonna be a lot of like people turning it on to tryhard mode and using like the best deck in terms of like in hopes of like climbing as much as possible. Videos that I'm interested in making are not only gameplay for that Blastoise deck. I also want to break down the Arceus Carnivine list that's taking me to top 1000 currently. God knows where I'll be when y'all see this picture, because I mean this video, because it's very, very like a roller coaster to climb in the rank. By the way, like you win 2 games, you're out of top 1000. You win 3, you're like barely in. It's a headache. But regardless, also I could just make a video on like tips and tricks on like how I climbed on ladder, or what I recommend to climb on ladder. If any of those like options interest you, please consider subscribing so you don't miss out once those videos get posted. And if you have any other suggestions on videos you want me to create or want to see, feel free to comment down below, as I'll look at every comment and respond to them as soon as I see them. With that, I wish you all the best in ranked, and above all else, stay pro.